Today we are going to talk about social media. If social media disappeared tomorrow, would society be better off or instantly crippled?
If social media vanished tomorrow, society would be crippled. We'd lose the infrastructure that connects families, drives activism, and even coordinates disaster relief in real time.
If social media vanished tomorrow, we'd breathe easier. We'd rediscover silence, focus, and conversation without algorithms manipulating our attention every waking moment.
Let's move to our next question. Does social media give young people a voice or rob them of real ones?
I'll start by agreeing with my opponent on one thing. Algorithms shape what gets heard, but to argue that this robs young people of their voices is to overlook how radically it has expanded who gets to speak in the first place. Historically, gatekeepers decided which youth opinions mattered: editors, politicians, media moguls. If you didn't have access to those channels, your words stopped at your bedroom wall. Social media shattered that ceiling. Take the Arab Spring. Young organizers in Tunisia and Egypt used Facebook and Twitter not just to shout into the void, but to mobilize millions. Closer to home, look at movements like March for Our Lives in the US. Teenagers, grieving and angry after school shootings, used Instagram to broadcast their pain and demands. Their reach dwarfed what traditional letters to politicians could have achieved. Critics often say these digital voices are shallow or ephemeral. But depth is not determined by medium. Martin Luther's theses spread because the printing press gave him reach, not because parchment was inherently deep. Likewise, TikTok, Twitter, or YouTube are simply today's printing presses. Some content is fluff, yes, but some is revolutionary. For marginalized youth, the stakes are even higher. LGBTQ teens in conservative towns, girls in patriarchal societies, or disabled youth without mobility. Social media gives them solidarity and audience they might never have locally. Does every voice find lasting influence? No. But empowerment is not about guaranteeing power. It's about granting access. And access today is wider than ever before.
Here are the 5 AIs that judge tonight's debate.
Access without depth is a mirage. Yes, social media gives more people the ability to speak, but does it give them the ability to be heard in a meaningful way? That's the real question. The printing press you mentioned empowered Luther because his ideas were debated in churches, universities, and councils. Social media doesn't often nurture that kind of dialogue. It rewards speed, virality, and outrage, not thoughtful engagement. You mentioned movements like the Arab Spring and March for Our Lives. True, social platforms helped mobilize. But what happened after? In Egypt, the same tools that spread revolution were turned into tools of surveillance, and young voices were silenced more brutally than before. Online momentum didn't translate into lasting structural power. Instead, governments and corporations learned how to use the same platforms to monitor, manipulate, and suppress dissent. And let's talk about young people on an everyday level. You say LGBTQ teens or marginalized youth find community online, and they do. But they also face disproportionate harassment, doxing, and bullying in those very spaces. For every story of solidarity, there are stories of trauma. The microphone you describe can just as easily amplify cruelty. Imagine being 15, posting your story, and receiving thousands of comments mocking or threatening you. Is that empowerment or a digital version of public shaming? So yes, youth have access, but too often it's access to a stage where algorithms decide who is mocked, who is silenced, and who is ignored. That's not real empowerment. It's a theater where young people mistake applause for respect.
You're right to warn against mistaking applause for respect. Virality isn't the same as validation, but dismissing online voices as theater underestimates how online speech often bleeds into offline change. Look at Greta Thunberg. A single tweet about school strikes snowballed into a global climate movement. Would her voice have carried as far through conventional channels at age 15? Highly unlikely. The same applies to countless youth-led initiatives, from local fundraising to global petitions. You brought up harassment, a very real threat. But again, harassment existed long before social media. The difference is that online, victims can rally allies just as quickly as attackers can pile on. When trolls target a teen for coming out, communities often mobilize in defense, drowning out hate with solidarity. It's not perfect protection, but it's an evolution from isolation. In the pre-digital age, that teen might have endured bullying alone in their schoolyard. Now they can find thousands who affirm their worth. And on your point about governments co-opting platforms, that's true. Authoritarian regimes weaponize social media, but that only underscores how powerful these platforms are. If they were trivial, regimes wouldn't bother censoring them. Their very efforts to control social media prove it gives ordinary people leverage that frightens the powerful. Empowerment doesn't mean guaranteed safety or instant justice. It means the chance to step onto a stage that was once locked. Social media hands young people the key. Whether they use it to sing, shout, or stumble is up to them, but at least the door is open.
Greta Thunberg is a strong example, but she is also the exception that proves the rule. For every Greta, there are millions whose voices dissolve into the endless scroll. A few rare individuals break through, but that's because algorithms anoint them, not because the platforms inherently value youth voices. In fact, most young people experience social media not as a stage, but as an arena. One where they compete for likes, relevance, and attention, often at the expense of authenticity. You frame harassment as a problem balanced by solidarity. But the scale is not equal. Studies consistently show young people, especially girls, face chronic exposure to abuse online, and this has measurable effects. Higher rates of anxiety, depression, and even self-harm. Saying at least they're not isolated ignores the toll of constant public attack. Community support helps, but it rarely erases the damage. And about regimes censoring platforms, that doesn't prove empowerment. It proves that governments recognize social media as a double-edged sword, useful for organizing dissent, but equally useful for surveillance and propaganda. The same feeds that spread protest slogans also spread disinformation campaigns that fracture communities. Ask yourself, are young people truly empowered if the very tools they use to speak can also be used to manipulate them? So, does social media give young people a voice? Technically, yes. But it also teaches them to equate worth with metrics, exposes them to relentless scrutiny, and leaves them vulnerable to forces they cannot control. That sounds less like empowerment and more like a trade-off where the costs are higher than the benefits.
Let's move to another question. Is comparison online destroying mental health or driving ambition?
Comparison has always shaped ambition. Before Instagram, people compared grades in school, cars in driveways, or medals on the field. The difference now is scale and accessibility. Social media lets a teenager in Mumbai see what a dancer in New York is achieving, or coder and loggers share benchmarks with Silicon Valley peers. Yes, that can sting, but it also democratizes aspiration. Instead of dreaming only within the walls of their town, young people now dream on a global stage. You argue this crushes self-esteem, and you're not wrong that studies show risks, but the same research also shows that context matters. In supportive online communities, comparison sparks motivation. Fitness groups encourage healthier habits, study forums boost academic performance, and creative platforms inspire new skills. Ambition isn't killed by seeing excellence, it's ignited. A young violinist who watches a virtuoso's YouTube channel doesn't just feel inferior. Often she practices harder. We should treat comparison online like fire. Uncontrolled, it burns. Guided, it illuminates. Instead of condemning the mechanism, we need to teach young people media literacy, how to distinguish staged perfection from reality, and how to frame others' success as proof of possibility rather than a verdict of failure. In that sense, social media doesn't destroy mental health. It challenges it, sometimes harshly, but also pushes resilience and growth in ways earlier generations never had access to.
Fire warms, yes, but when it's left unchecked, it rouses entire forests. That's what social media comparison does to mental health. You point to fitness groups or study forums, but those are islands in an ocean dominated by curated perfection. Most feeds aren't showing real life. They're highlight reels, filtered and edited to manufacture envy. A teenager doesn't need media literacy to see through it. They already know it's fake, but knowing it's fake doesn't stop the emotional hit. Psychologists call this automatic comparison. Your brain reacts before your reasoning does. You liken this to seeing a virtuoso violinist and feeling inspired. But here's the catch. The violinist's skill is based on talent and effort, visible over time. On social media, much of what inspires envy is wealth, beauty, or lifestyle advantages no amount of effort can replicate. A working-class teen can't grind their way into being born in a mansion or having an airbrushed body. That gap between aspiration and reality creates despair, not ambition. The statistics are blunt. Higher social media use correlates strongly with higher rates of anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, especially in adolescence. That's not just correlation by coincidence. It's a pattern across dozens of studies. You can call it resilience training if you want, but when hospitalizations for self-harm rise alongside TikTok usage, we need to admit the fire is burning more than it's warming.
You're right that automatic comparison kicks in fast, sometimes before reason can intervene. But automatic doesn't mean irreversible. Just as athletes train their reflexes, young people can train their responses to digital stimuli. And we're already seeing this. Entire online subcultures now mock influencer excess, parody unrealistic lifestyles, and celebrate authenticity over gloss. The very platforms that once fueled envy are breeding countercultures that dismantle it. And about unreachable standards, wealth, beauty, privilege, you're correct. Some comparisons are toxic because they're unattainable, but others are entirely within reach. The coding teen in Legos might not be born into Silicon Valley wealth, but he can use GitHub and online tutorials to compete, collaborate, and one day get hired globally. Social media doesn't just expose privilege, it exposes pathways. That's why we see entrepreneurs, artists, and activists rising from places long excluded from traditional pipelines. As for mental health data, I don't deny the concerns. But we also need to separate heavy use from intentional use. Studies that measure hours spent miss the nuance of how that time is used. A teen doom-scrolling celebrity gossip for 5 hours is not the same as a teen spending 5 hours building an audience for their artwork. Both count as high social media use, but their outcomes differ drastically. That distinction matters before we declare comparison inherently destructive.
Distinction does matter, but the problem is that platforms are not neutral arenas. They are engineered to maximize engagement, which means privileging content that provokes envy, outrage, or desire. So yes, there are creative teens building art communities, but the algorithm doesn't push those spaces to the masses. It pushes the bikini photo, the luxury haul, the viral prank. It's not a fair contest where resilience training can level the field. It's a casino where the house always wins. You point to countercultures mocking influencer excess, and I agree those are refreshing. But think about why they exist. They're not signs that the system is healthy. They're symptoms of how unhealthy it has become. People don't parody something benign. They parody what feels oppressive. The very need for these subcultures underscores the harm mainstream comparison inflicts. And while I admire stories of Legos coders breaking into global markets, those are exceptions. For most, exposure to unreachable lifestyles doesn't show pathways. It shows walls. The vast majority won't go viral, won't be hired by Silicon Valley, and won't become influencers. Instead, they're left measuring themselves against ideals designed to be unattainable. That's not fire lighting the way. That's fire burning down the house and telling people to rebuild with ashes.
Now, to our final question. Will social media be remembered as the engine that pushed humanity forward or the force that tore it apart?
When historians look back, they'll see social media as a messy but transformative engine. It's easy to focus on the negatives, but the arc of history shows that disruptive technologies always begin chaotically. The printing press unleashed both the Enlightenment and centuries of religious wars. Radio gave us mass propaganda and mass education. Television spread both Sesame Street and consumerism. Social media is no different. It accelerates the best and worst of us, but in doing so, it propels society forward. Think about knowledge access. Never before could a teenager in a remote village access MIT lectures, learn a new language, or connect with peers across continents at zero cost. Think about disaster response, earthquakes, floods, pandemics. Social media allows for instant coordination, relief, and survival tips in real time. And think about accountability. Police brutality caught on phones, corrupt leaders exposed, corporations pressured into reforms. That's history making transparency, enabled by billions of tiny digital witnesses. Will future generations note the harms? Absolutely. They'll cite disinformation, polarization, mental health struggles. But they'll also see that society's adapted, building digital literacy, regulation, and healthier norms around these platforms. Just as we eventually learn to use cars with seatbelts and traffic laws, we'll learn to use social media responsibly. The net effect will be remembered not as destruction, but as acceleration, flawed, turbulent, but ultimately forward driving.
Acceleration is not always progress. History is littered with engines that promise transformation but also unleashed ruin. The Industrial Revolution brought prosperity, but also child labor, pollution, and colonial exploitation. Nuclear power promised endless energy, but also gave us Hiroshima. Social media may indeed be remembered as an engine, but engines can drive societies into walls. You highlight transparency and coordination, and those are real. But historians may just as easily write about disinformation campaigns that destabilized democracies, troll farms that fractured communities, or viral conspiracy theories that led people to refuse vaccines during a pandemic. Instead of enlightenment, we may be remembered for drowning truth in a flood of falsehoods. Future textbooks might describe this era as the time when humanity outsourced its collective memory to algorithms optimized for profit. And while you envision regulation and digital literacy improving over time, I'm less optimistic. These platforms evolve faster than governments can legislate, and faster than schools can teach. By the time we catch up, new harms emerge. If societies fail to tame this engine, future generations won't remember it as messy progress. They'll remember it as the accelerant that deepened inequality, eroded trust, and left mental health in crisis.
You're right to remind us that acceleration can mean catastrophe, but that doesn't erase the innovations that stick. The Industrial Revolution had horrors, yes, but it also permanently raised life expectancy, literacy, and living standards. Social media's chaos may scar, but it will also leave behind irreversible progress. The very fact that you and I can debate across borders, reaching an audience in seconds, is itself part of that legacy. Your concern about disinformation is real, But here too, history gives perspective. The printing press spread dangerous pamphlets alongside revolutionary science. The difference is that eventually, societies built institutions, libraries, universities, journalism, to filter and verify. Social media is still in its infancy, with shaky institutions. But that doesn't mean they won't emerge. We're already seeing fact-checking groups, platform accountability campaigns, and even AI tools designed to combat lies at scale. The adjustment may be messy, but it's coming. As for mental health, I think future generations will look back at early social media the way we look at early industrial pollution, a preventable harm that taught us to build cleaner systems. It will be a cautionary tale, yes, but also a springboard toward healthier digital ecosystems. In that sense, social media won't be remembered as the wreckage itself, but as the spark that forced humanity to evolve faster.
Your optimism is admirable, but I fear it assumes too much resilience and too much progress. The Industrial Revolution improved living standards, but it also entrenched systems of exploitation that still scar the world today. Who benefits most from social media's progress? Mostly the corporations extracting data and profit. The average teenager may enjoy new connections, but they also inherit the bill in the form of fractured attention, compromised privacy, and declining mental health. Yes, institutions eventually arose to check the printing press and industrialization, but the timeline matters. Centuries passed before meaningful safeguards appeared. Do we have centuries to wait while social media reshapes politics, culture, and childhood development? Democracies are already wobbling under the strain of polarization. Waiting for natural adjustment feels like gambling with civilization itself. So when historians look back, I think they'll see both sides. Sparks of empowerment, yes, but also embers of destruction that consumed trust, truth, and focus. Whether they call it an engine or a wrecking ball, I suspect their verdict will be grim. Social media accelerated humanity, but not forward, downward, into deeper fractures we were too slow to repair.
Thank you both. Let's look at the final score.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder: the scores you saw tonight weren't judged by us. They were generated by AI. That means they don't represent any absolute truth. This was just an experiment to see how artificial intelligence can drive and evaluate a debate. The real winner is for you to decide. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay positive.